Well, I didn't have really initial impressions to play. I had an initial idea for a story that I began to talk to Maria Milisavljevic about. Was to look at the life of Weibo Ludwig, who was a Christian fundamentalist who lived out in northern Alberta in the Peace River country area and set up a farm where they were trying to get off the grid, and a kind of a new religious grouping of him and his family, a couple of families there. And they're getting off the grid and trying to create their own lifestyle. And that fascinated me because eventually that family gets accused by the RCMP of terrorism. Weibo goes to jail for real. And he was always kind of, the fingers pointed at him whenever there were terrorist acts on the sour gas wells or the oil pipelines out there. And I thought, what would make a man do that? Why would they go that distance? Why would they break really with their Christian values and destroy property, operate outside the sense of mercy and love and kindness and charity? What would drive them to lose sight of what I think are the good Christian values? And I think that was true of him and his family, his group there, his church there. And they were trying to do something that was like get off the grid, get off, live purely, live environmentally, live according to the laws of God. And it appears they went violent, and what made them go violent. And I was fascinated with that story, that people would break with these one values because they were driven to that point. And we are seeing, of course, a society being affected more and more by environmental issues that are critical to our life and livelihood and our water and our food. And in this instance, we see people who are victims of sour gas and leaks in sour gas, and that's extraordinarily dangerous. And we kind of, they don't get much advertising, the sour gas leaks, but it's happening, and it's disturbing to people, and people are frightened. They can turn on, there's some places you can turn on the water in northern Alberta and light the water on fire from what the sour gas is coming through the water system. So there's something problematic that isn't really being addressed and monitored severely enough by the government agencies and by the companies that produce this to address some of the issues that Weibo Ludwig had. And I thought it was an important story to look at. Now, this story that we're doing in Peace River Country is inspired by the Weibo Ludwig story because we have to write a play and not a documentary. And I'm very interested in seeing how Maria has taken this play and put these characters in more extreme situations, drawn from that history, but wrote her own play about what makes someone change their value system so radically. Well, what is it? From the first draft, the idea was we were going to base it on a play called Wojciech. And Wojciech is actually not, it's a very famous play, and there's an opera called Wojciech by Alvin Berg. But George Bruckner wrote the original play, but we don't even really have the play. We just have scenes, and people have put them in certain orders, and they consider this the play Wojciech. But it's, also it's written on paper where the paper's fading, and so that whole play, this great classical play, was a radical play out of Germany in 1760, way ahead of its time, a very modern play, is falling apart and disappearing. And I like the idea that you could shuffle the play any way possible and present Wojciech, and you wouldn't have, you wouldn't know exactly which the order is. And what people who put together the play, they make up their own play every time they do it. So I became interested in that idea that you could take maybe the Weibo Ludwig story, and inspired by this Peace River Country story, not the Weibo Ludwig, and shuffle it any way, and you'd end up with the same kind of affect, the same kind of results. And Maria talked about this kind of repeating mythology that happens in these stories, where there's one man against the system and gets defeated by the system and loses his kind of principles and values despite the system. And you can shuffle the scenes anyway, and you kind of end up in the same story, or sort of a different story, or maybe there's a whole different variations. So we explored that for a while. We would shuffle the scenes and read the play differently. And we suddenly started to come to the conclusion that maybe it might be interesting to look at this story and move backwards. So we see the result, the end of the play, as the first scene, and we go back through time as they go from being victims of the sour gas, how they eventually became protesters, and then terrorists, and then good Christian people and victims of the sour gas. And we go back to sort of the genesis point of that particular organization up in Peace River, and why they were in nature, and how far away they were in fact taken from their nature, and we see in this story a man who was very concerned about his very large family, all his daughters and his grandchildren, all living on the same farm, and a number of them serious victims of sour gas leakages, and watching his livestock being also serious victims. So you see someone who is endeavoring to protect their family against the larger system. And to me, that's a very common story when people are caught in these larger systems. And there's something kind of beautiful and idealistic and idyllic about that. But also how quickly they were surrounded by sour gas wells, their whole farm. The worst thing in the world, really, to be surrounded by, and then becoming victims of that. And you see the decline, where your values fail you, where you do the things that you never thought you would do to save your family. And I think that's another human story at the Tarragon, if you like.